All right, guys, welcome back, and now we're moving on to part two of the GregTech base tour. Um, part one, oh crap, part one we didn't get a lot done. I just think I just talked about biodiesel and ranted a little bit. Sorry, guys. All right, let's hopefully part two will be more informative. So part two, tungsten steel boilers, very simple. Now I want to talk about one thing about boiler math is that, well, first of all, boilers. The tricky part about boilers is that you can have them share walls, as you can clearly see here. And once again, that really is annoying with the water, so I'll move far away. So there's a couple of things I want to talk about the math regarding boilers. Is that first of all, they make steam output at various rates. It's You really can't see it here, but large bronze boilers should output, if I recall, around 800 millibuckets of steam, 600 or 800, one of the two. Large titanium boilers is about 1600, and then steel is 900. So I'm pretty sure this is 600, 900, 1600, 2400. You see there's a really large jump from titanium boilers to large tungsten steel boilers. I just want to let you know, though, these do require master circuits, which are that's ludicrous voltage circuit. So these things are pretty pricey. And now that I mentioned circuits, let's actually talk about circuits within GregTech and GregTech editions. So as you can see here, pardon the big whites, right? Pardon the scariness, but this is a basic breakdown that I showed of circuits, because what you have is at the top axis, you have, this is used for crafting components, and on the left, you can have when you can actually make them. Let me give you an example. So like I said, that early on, you have a bunch of these weird circuits. They're called electronic circuits. They're used from LV or MV. And they're kind of nested crafting recipes, right? So if I look at electronic circuits, so you have the good electronic circuit, and this actually can be comprised of basic circuits. And you can make all of these in a 3x3 crafting grid. You don't actually need that much power to make them. Well, actually you do. Yeah, but you can, kind of actually just make this in a 3x3 crafting grid, which is why I said you can actually make them in LV. So at LV, you can craft up to MV circuits. Now, when you get to MV, it gets a little bit better. In fact, once you get to MV, using MV only power, you can make circuits that are just as good and used in extreme tiered machines. I know, right? Hardcore. But what I mean by that is when you look at workstations, and workstations just only require MV circuit assemblers, and you can dig down processor assemblies and integrated processors, and all these are all MV, right? You just really need to get access to the silicon. If I could describe GregTech and GregTech editions combined together for an experience, it's going to introduce a lot of big microcrafting processes. One of them is the petroleum processes. Another one is the polymer processes. Petroleum would be like oil, soul sand, toluene, benzene, propene, that kind of thing, with a distillation tower that's coming up next. If I could talk about polymers, so that would be stuff like Teflon, or aka polytetrafluoroethylene, epoxy resin, it could be polyethylene, also known as plastic. That's one of the other microcrafting types that is introduced by it. And then one of the last ones is the circuits that I talked about earlier. So let's go back to this. Let's go back to this thing really quickly. For the most part, it follows a fairly linear style, right? Once you get to quantum processor, once you get to crystal processors, once you get to wetware, right, you can craft all the way upwards. In fact, you only really need max/infinite to really craft the wetware mainframe. In fact, no, you only need UV. You only need ultra voltage to craft wetware mainframe. For the most part, if you want to save on resources, you should always craft up the next tier, right? Always craft up the next tier. So what that means is that once you actually have IV, you can really make EV level circuits super easy, because once again, this is a quantum processor. Let's look at that. Quantum processor, easy, right? SMD capacitors, SMD transistors, and even though this looks complicated right now and kind of overwhelming, these SMD capacitors, these are the same type you'll be using at basic circuits, at good circuits, right? So this SMD stuff, consistent throughout all the circuits that you use when you need to make processors. So the only big difference, right, is that this tiering, you need to have a better fiber and better silicon, but these are very easy to get. So no matter what, if before you get overwhelmed, the general rule of thumb is that you just want to make you want to tier up to the next circuit as soon as possible, just because it'll just be easier on you when you want to craft it. So I think that covers it mostly for circuits. But let's go back to what we have on boilers. So these boilers that we have here, tungsten steel boilers, and once again, I did talk about the math. You can see it in the spreadsheet where it will be more water efficient or more steam efficient. I mean, more EU efficient if you, instead of putting the fuel inside a diesel generator, you can put it into a boiler. The big thing though is that this will constantly use up steam all the time, and it'll constantly use up fuel all the time, which means that since this is a constant drain, you probably want to have this used as a baseline level of power. So it's something that's always running all the time around the clock. So electric blast furnaces, that's great. If you want to have it run your sieving setup, that's great. Your ore processing, which is always processing outputs from your sieving setup, that's great. If you do not want to use it for on-demand machines, like, oh, this, maybe an extruder that occasionally needs a rod every 10 minutes or a rod maybe once a day when you ask for it, you don't really need that. That's I do not advise you use steam for that. Just have it straight up inside a turbo diesel generator, because in the long run it'll probably end up using more fuel than not. And if you could see here, we could first start talking about how multi-blocks work in GregTech. So multi-blocks are extremely modular, and that's one of the things I love about GregTech. And GregTech Additions adds the preview, if I recall correctly, but I could be corrected on this one. But what you need to do here, if you go to the boiler, it even has a layer by layer viewing of what you can put in. And for the most part, even though it looks fixed, like you have an output hatch here and a boiler here and firebox casings and input buses there, play around with it. I mean, if you really want to know the full extent, you can look into the source code, but my biggest recommendation is playing it around. There are just two rules you need to follow. One is that multi-blocks cannot share hatches. They cannot share hatches at all. Second is that they can share walls. So I could have just basically combined that into basically one rule. But as you can see here, there's 4 output hatches. Before, you could actually have one output hatch sharing with multiple controllers. They'll both feed into that one controller. But either way, this is outputting 2K millibuckets, 2.4K millibuckets of steam per tick. Now, as you see here, this is a fluid interface. It's an interface that's on a that's in a flat mode. In fact, to save on cables to be more efficient, I should actually craft it back to be like this. What the interesting part is though, is that you see how there's 16 buckets here? This auto exports steam automatically, right? So output hatches every 5 ticks or so will output their contents into a nearby thing. And it's the same for input hatches and input buses. So technically, I don't even have to have import buses here. What I could do was, or fluid export buses, I could literally just have a fluid interface or a tank of water, and it'll suck that up automatically every 5 ticks. I just did it that way just because I thought it looks cooler, to be honest. Plus, I also want to access the firebox, right? I want to be able to see what below is. That's why I kind of left it as export buses. But if you are really considerate about lag and want to be super ultra efficient, because once again, I personally think it's much more efficient to have a bunch of interfaces stockpiled and you pull from that, rather than having fluid export buses constantly checking, constantly pushing. And also, if you want to check out the water usage on these boilers are actually pretty small. GregTech actually accounts for boilers. So like 1 millibucket of steam, like 1 millibucket of steam gets used. That's not even every single tick. That's like almost every single other second. But 1 millibuckets of steam expands to be like, I don't know, 200 millibuckets. Don't quote me on that. I don't know the math, but it's other mods will do, like, for simplicity, 1 millibucket of water equals 1 millibucket of steam, such as mechanism. In GregTech, it's like 1 actually is like a volumetric expansion. So like 200 millibuckets of steam. All right, so that takes care of boilers. Now what we have next is the pyrolysis ovens. This is going to be for oil. Once again, I talked about, what are the different types of big crafting processes that GregTech Addition adds on top of GregTech. And if I could explain the relationship between GregTech Additions and GregTech Community Edition, it's kind of similar to, what GT5U did. It just adds stuff on top. It adds quote unquote more machine tiers. It adds more crafting processes. It adds stuff like the fusion reactor, right? So it adds more tiers and more gameplay that can expand it to be beyond, 100, 200, 300, 400 hours. But it doesn't do a lot of innovation in that concept. It really takes, I hate the term, but I'm going to use it. It Gregifies GregTech, so to say. And part of the reasons why I hate using that term is because what does that even mean anymore, right? People used to use the term Gregify as like a buzzword all the time. And okay, here's another minor rant. People always use the term Gregify all the time. And I'm like, what's that even mean? Do you personally know Greg himself? Do you actually know what his intentions were? Because even though people's always said it's hard and it's grindy, it's not. It also provides tools for you to deal with that grindiness. So is it really grindy if it actually gives you the tools to deal with it? I mean, okay, I guess it's relatively more grindy than a kitchen sink pack filled with thermal expansion and mechanism, which isn't to say that they're bad, but it's different play styles, really. And to think about it, really, what's funny was that the philosophy of having progression packs and forced tiering and have to use this certain material before it could go to the next level, I mean, that's not a new concept in gaming, but people treat it as if it was a new concept in modded Minecraft. And honestly, like, that's been around since 2013 anyway, man. Like, let's be real here. And now we're here in 2018 and a lot more progression packs. They're the norm. You have a lot more quote unquote experienced players not even playing kitchen sink packs anymore because they're just like, I'll get over that in a week, whatever, maybe I'll try it out, not my big thing. They're just searching for that next high, that next quote unquote expert pack, which is also another term that I don't like. Tiny rant over. Let's go back to this. So you got the input hatch Pyrolysis oven. So the Pyrolysis oven, it's basically what I would call a machine that takes wood. It just does stuff to wood, if that's the best way, without sounding dirty. It has a lot of different outputs. Most of these outputs, in my opinion, were kind of not special. I mean, some people, here's the thing, there's a lot of different options. Some options in the long run might be better than others, but in your specific case, in your specific playstyle, you just might realize, hey, I might actually need wood vinegar better than heavy oil. Or your other friend playing might be, hey, look, I might actually need wood gas. I think wood gas suits my needs better, because they all have different byproducts. But what it does, it all boils eventually down to the petroleum process. So if you're in a world in normal GregTech, right, and not a skyblock, like as you can see here where there's nothing, if you're playing normal GregTech, you'll have oil deposits that you can extract oil out of, dig oil from, and then process that oil. And really, there's no cost to that, right? It's free energy in the ground. But if you can't do that, well, then they added this option with the Pyrolysis oven, which is energy intensive, just because, like, look at this, right? It's 53k EU at HV, because that's greater than 120 EU per tick, to just only get 200 millibuckets of oil. This is not worth it, in my opinion, for energy. Not at all. Not at all. Not at all. Not at all. But it is worth it for what I did in this case, which was for processing it for byproducts. So normally, if you have a zero energy cost, because you can just find oil in the ground and bucket it up and then transfer it to your base, you can put in a distillation tower or a distillery, because distillation towers are actually EV level. Once again, you'll need extreme circuits and EV crafting tiers to make it. But distilleries, there are various tiers. You can have an LV, MV. You can make distilleries early on, but the biggest difference is that distilleries are focused. So you'll have to use 150 millibuckets of heavy oil to only get that, only 250 millibuckets of sulfuric heavy fuel. In this specific case, you can get all the byproducts all at once, so you can have your cake and eat it. So distillation tower is almost better than distilleries if you have more than one output. So the Pyrolysis ovens are creating heavy oil from wood, right? I don't know, they're doing Pyrolysis oven style things, and they're feeding it to distillation tower in the back. This has more byproducts with the heavy fuel. I could use this to make diesel once again, but I already showed that biodiesel is like really superior in most cases, and it's really easy to scale up leaves and fish rather than scaling up heavy oil and wood and Pyrolysis ovens. Because I mean, look at this thing actually takes like actual materials, whereas the other one was a joke. It took like a magical sieve and like a couple pieces of wood and leaves. What I've used this for, though, was for microcrafting processes, because if you can get sulfuric heavy fuel and you get that into heavy fuel and then you crack it, and in real world, cracking is a type of process where it's a lot easier to break down by either infusing it with steam or infusing it with hydrogen. You know, just adding a lot more heat without blowing it up to various petroleum products. That's like the layman's description of it, so don't quote me on that either, but that's how I understand it. So you get steam cracked heavy fuel, and then you can distill that into all this delicious byproducts. You get naphtha, you get light fuel, and it's funny because, oh, look, Viral, you can probably use this light fuel for more energy. Guess what? No, I don't. I just crack it once again so I can distill it into more things. And you can see it kind of distills it back into heavy fuel, but at a far lesser concentration with all these byproducts. So what I'll do is I have this in a cracking loop. As you see with my export buses, I have this constantly looping so I can squeeze out every single last bit of byproduct that I need for my future processing. I have this methane here. It's probably building up in my terminal. I'm not really using it because right now I'm running on plasma. Don't need this methane. It's dirty anyways. But I have benzene, and benzene's good for dichlorobenzene. It's good for styrene. I have butene, which is also good for styrene butadiene rubber. Or butadiene, sorry, and then I don't know what actually butane's used for. It's just piling up in my I mean, I could use it for energy, or I can even recrack it again, right? Recrack it, get more stuff, and that's what it really boils down to, right? You can crack various types of liquids and get byproducts from that. Also, there's a zombie here somewhere that threw me off. Interesting. Okay. This is kind of creepy. Anyways, so as I was saying, why would you actually prefer to have this this cracking machine instead of, because when you want to get steam cracked stuff, right? In fact, here, let's just do the good old ostrich method. Let's just ignore the monster, right? So why would you have steam cracked? There's two ways to get steam cracked. You can either put in a chemical reactor and then steam crack it inside a, cracking recipe. So you can make a bunch of chemical reactors, or you can use the multi-block. Why would you want to use the multi-block? Two reasons. A, because you could put multiple input hatches. So I have one hatch dedicated to only heavy fuel. I have another hatch dedicated to only light fuel. If I had to do it the other way, single machine methodology, I would have to make so many chemical reactors instead of hatches. And hatches are just simple, man. Hatches, anytime you want to craft a hatch, it's literally glass and the hatch of the appropriate tiering. I could make these all LV hatches, right? I can make these all LV hatches, which is just basic steel. Not an issue. And in fact, let's actually talk about this right now. For machine hulls in GregTech, there are different types of tiers of machine hulls which all correspond to different types of machines. What I mean by that is that you have LV machine hull, and that's used to make every single LV machine tiering. You have MV machine hull, and that's used to make everything that's called MV. HV, and so forth. They're not nested recipes, so you will have to start from new. But it's nice because when you get to ZPM, which is 0-point module, that's a fictional power generator within Stargate, or ultra voltage, you don't have to create a ZPM. You don't have to create a LUV nested within IV, nested within HV. You can just create a fresh one right off the bat, which is what I prefer in most cases, especially when you have this many tiers to travel through. Now, in LV, that's just steel. Basic steel, that's nice. In MV, that's aluminum. In HV, you have stainless steel, which is a little bit more complex than steel in my opinion, but it's because it's just steel. It requires chrome, manganese, and nickel. Then EV, you have titanium, right? And then you have tungsten steel. I don't know if we're getting into like the fictional alloys here now, but I think this is kind of cool because this is tungsten plus steel combination. In fact, if I could say, I probably use tungsten steel the most in this pack, just because I love the look of tungsten steel, man. I like the dark blue. Tungsten steel is high enough that you'll be using it for a lot of endgame builds, and I did make a lot of IV machines in my opinion, but I have also a lot of HV machines. Then you have LUV, that doesn't stand for love, that stands for ludicrous voltage, which is chrome. Then you have ZPM, which is made from iridium, and then finally you have ultra voltage, which is made from osmium. So those are the specific tiers, and the reason why I went through that is to show you, the player, that look, If you want to build a lot of UV stuff, expect to use up a lot of osmium, man. If you want to, or girl, if you want to make a lot of ZPM stuff, make sure you have a lot of iridium in the back burner. And to be honest, spoiler alert, you don't need to make a lot of these hulls. I mean, later for fusion reactors, you probably do, but not as much as stuff you would need for like stainless steel or titanium or tungsten steel. But what I like about this design is that it just lets the player plan in advance. If it's just like, hey, look, when I get to this certain age, I want to make a lot of machines, then you keep in the back of your head, then I'm going to need a lot of tungsten steel, because if I want to do a lot of infrastructure expansion in insane voltage. That little bit over, let's go back to what we were talking about when it comes to the cracking unit. So the cracking unit, steam, this is, you know, what I'm actually going to be cracking things with. But that's why you want to use this multi-block more than a bunch of small tiny blocks. And then the second reason, it's so easy to scale this up. Right now I have HV and a turbo diesel generator, which is plenty fast for the cracking unit, right? Because most of these recipes are MV, so it'll automatically, most of these recipes are MV and they take 2 seconds anyway. But if I, for some reason, want it to go super fast, right? Easy. I can just literally break this MV input hatch and slap on an EV level generator on top of it to power it. So it's really easy to overclock it because I only need to make the input hatches. That's why for the most times, and that's the advantage of having multi-blocks over or multi-block processors over the single block. And I think that's actually most exemplified by the cracking unit because it's so, due to the variety of inputs it can take, it's easier to make hatches than it is to make more chemical reactors. Now we have 3 distillation towers, and once again, this is talking about the previous loop, the fluid solid, I mean the petroleum loop I had established earlier. If I recall correctly, this distillation tower should be feeding, yep, this is the steam cracked naphtha. Let me put these back. But that's steam cracked naphtha, and then the other ones is light fuel and heavy fuel, because that's all the byproducts I get from petroleum. Your setup might look different if you just choose to use charcoal byproducts, if you use raw oil instead of heavy oil, but you know, once again, it's really a shuffling of machines. Once again, what I did here, I stacked fluid interfaces, because if I move this fluid interface, you can see it already auto outputs from an output hatch. And the reason why they're so tall, even though they could be various heights, because if you look at the multi-block, actually wrong one. Here we go, distillation tower. If you look at the multi-block here, it can go taller, and every single height that you add can give you an additional byproduct. So what I want to say is that distillation tower can have up to, let's check out the most, right? If it's heavy fuel, if I recall correctly. It can have up, well, actually it can have up to what, 12 byproducts, right? 12 total byproducts, but you can only add 1 hatch per height level. So if I were to add another hatch here, it would break the whole entire multi-block. It would not be recognized as valid. Same thing, like I can put input hatches, that's fine. I can have, in fact, I have an energy input hatch here, and I have at the bottom of the distillation tower, you can see kind of, that there is the input hatch itself where all the oil comes in from the bottom. That's fixed. You can't put that anywhere. And I also should have an output bus somewhere right here, right? I have a normal interface that outputs the carbon dust that results from the processing. But if you want to add additional byproducts, because if you put a recipe, like say you make a 10 tall distillation tower and you put in something that has like 14 byproducts, the last 4 byproducts or the last 5 byproducts will get voided. So you only have 9 out of the 14. So that's why you want to make these things as tall as you need them to, no taller, or taller if you want yourself some extra safe space. But yeah, and then I use applied energistics just because it's easier to manage. Okay. So for the next part here, that deals it with the petroleum process, and I already talked about the circuit process. So let's just go over really quick my applied energistics setup. The main reason why I have these torches here is it was just because of future expansion. I didn't know how many molecular assemblers I would actually need. In hindsight, I don't really need all these now. I could just probably just leave a torch here so I don't get mobs. But yeah, I didn't really need all those torches. If you also see, this is how I normally like to design my molecular assemblers in my base. Some people prefer to go 3x3. This is a 4x4x4. It has 32 interfaces exactly and 32 molecular assemblers. Some people prefer the 3x3. I like this because this actually has a higher, in my opinion, it looks better. It stacks better, and that interfaces overall will have access to multiple molecular assemblers. Now, what I want, some of you might be familiar with AE2, so you can skip this part if you want, but one interface can access multiple molecular assemblers. However, if you start putting speed upgrades in these things, there's a heavier cost, quote unquote cost, right? TKH Gaming has a wonderful video on it, but you'd actually need to start adding in crafting co-processing units, because crafting co-processing units, it allows interfaces to access more blocks in a system. It's their way of balancing the crafting mechanic. So instead of having one interface only use one machine, you can add more crafting co-processing units so it can access multiple machines from different sides. Kind of similar to how I have this one interface accessing a molecular assembler on the right, on the left, bottom, top. I can also have it access machines on either side, right, for efficiency. So if I have to do a large batch craft of fine electrum wires, it can do the advanced wire mill on the left and the advanced wire mill on the right. Going back here, and you need crafting co-processing units to do that. Here's another small thing. When you start adding acceleration cards, that quote-unquote increases the cost. So, for example, if I just had a 64K crafting storage with just one crafting co-processing unit on here, I would probably only be able to handle 4 molecular assemblers without speed upgrades. Once I put in speed upgrades, it'll probably only be able to handle 2 with speed upgrades. Once I add all these, just for extra safety, I should be able to handle all 5 that I have access to make it nice. Another thing is, yes, I know people probably say, oh, you can add additional molecular assemblers to the edge of the interfaces, Viral. Why aren't you doing that? You should maximize efficiency. I literally don't care. Like, there is actually once again a small benefit from having 3 interfaces, 3 molecular assemblers access to an interface than there is versus 5. I just want to keep this nice and clean into a 4x4. But if I wanted to maximize it, yes, I can make it look like a really ugly flower. That is true. I concede to that. Oh, let me also stop this. But yeah, so I thought I would need more of this in this pack for the different types of crafting. A 4x4x4 was all that I actually needed, so that was kind of nice. Let's move on to the next part. This is also from Crail Tombstone. It literally has a ghost appear. It looks like Ghost Jesus. I personally think it looks like a penis. I think it's kind of a joke, not really funny. Only reason I have it disabled in the config is because I don't feel like restarting my server to turn that off. Now, so what we have here are Advanced Chemical Reactor 3s. This is kind of a little bit of advanced setup, so it's chronologically a little bit off-putting, but I want to put it here because this is something that you will need to do once you get to the late stage, and this is all for Radon. So once you get Radon, well, Radon is used for a lot of endgame crafting resources. I'm not sure if this is realistically used in real life, but it's going to be for improved quantum eyes and improved nether stars. You need improved nether stars for better ZPM field generators, and all that field generators are whenever you see it. So this is actually a good time to go back to GregTech, and let's go to meta, and let's go to various what's the best way to word it? Let's go to pump, right? Meta item -1. Let's go to, oh, looks like we finally found that hostile mob. Oh no, it was a spider. The best way for me to describe that is that there are a series of microcrafting items that GregTech has. The first one that you'll need is a motor. So let's just do meta item 1. Here we go. Okay, perfect. So ignore all these cells and let's look at this. So GregTech has a bunch of various microcrafting items, right? They're emitters. So we can see here that there are sensors, emitters, field generators, robot arms, electric pistons, conveyor modules, pumps, and motors. The most basic one, I don't know why they put it last, but the most basic one is motors. And when I say why it's basic is because you will be using motors to create pumps, right? This electric pump to make a motor. In order to, and these are strictly, as of right now, microcrafting tools only. They're only there used to make certain items. For example, robot arm, oops, that's a big one. A robot arm here at MV requires 2 motors and electric piston. And then electric piston also requires a bunch of stuff as well as a motor. And a lot of things are built upon motors, right? Let's just keep it simple like that. Well, sensors are a different story, but if I could best describe it, is that in GregTech, the microcrafting follows the same exact pattern at various tiers. You'll just need different levels of materials. Remember what I said earlier when you had machine hulls, right? Different machine hulls, and oh look, I want to make a lot of insane voltage machine hulls, so I'll know that I need to make a lot of tungsten steel. Kind of the same thing with motors, right? LV motors will be used in a lot of LV machines. So once you have the LV machines, you know that, hey, I'm gonna need a lot of copper because these use a lot of copper wire. I'm gonna need a lot of magnetic iron rods because these use a lot of magnetic iron rods, or normal iron rods, or steel rods, depending which recipe you prefer. Kind of the same thing that follows over if I wanted to make extreme voltage. You need a lot of annealed copper because it's 8 times annealed copper wire. You need a lot of titanium rods. Once again, that ghost is also there, so you don't need apologize about that. I'll actually move this into part 3. It's getting a little bit long, but as I focus up on this microcrafting part, you will need I had another phone call, so I had to turn off the mic. But you also had advanced extractors. Losing my train of thought. Yeah, so I was talking about the conveyor belts, which also uses various microcrafting motors, right? And I look at IV. So hey, look, I need a lot of copper annealed wire, need a lot of tungsten steel rods because I need to make a lot of these IV machines. They all follow the same crafting format. It'll just be different material tiers. So once you know what the format is, just look at JEI and you can plan accordingly. There's not a lot of surprises there if you just look at JEI. All right, that'll be up for part 2. In part 3, I'll go through more of my base and try to explain more of what I know about GregTech.